It's a pleasure to be able to see all of you here in Brussels again. The European Council has taken place in very unsettling times, turbulent times. So it was good that we were able to take the time to discuss all the manifold challenges we see in international developments. We extensively discussed the situation in the Middle East. We shared our assessments, and a number of heads of state and government present here had traveled to the region, to Israel and the neighboring countries recently, and have made intensive efforts in communicating their views and concerns about the situation. The key message of the EU is we condemn the terrorist attacks by Hamas on Israel in the strongest terms. Many Israeli citizens have died or have been abducted. We stand in solidarity with Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself. And this is something that the European Council has made clear. What we also agree on is that it is absolutely necessary that the hostages must be released without any precondition, and that it is necessary at the same time to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. The people of Gaza, the population there, is also a victim of Hamas that has seized power in a coup d'etat and since then has been abusing the population for its own purposes and is using them as human shields. It is clear for us that it is important to prevent a further escalation of the conflict, so it is important for us that we issue a clear warning against all those who might interfere in this conflict. That is true for Hezbollah, Iranian proxies, and Iran itself, of course. It is clear that such an extensive discussion brings together different points of view and perspectives, but still it is important to come to a common decision. We were able to achieve that. It is a clear, unmistakable message, and I'm very happy that we had this exchange of views, this debate, and even more that we were able to take this clear stance as the European Union. Of course, we have also looked at the further development of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. It is a terrible war leading to a terrible number of victims. There were so many people dead, left so many people dead in Ukraine, young, old people, incredible destruction of infrastructure, cities, towns. Everything due to the imperialist plan of Putin to expand his reign. And this must not succeed. So we firmly stand by Ukraine and continue to support Ukraine in humanitarian terms, financially, and also the member states deliver weapons. It is also clear that we need to speak about the financial situation of the European Union. Financial support for Ukraine shall be granted together. Everybody has been positive about this, so we can take the ensuing decisions. We also had a brief intervention by President Zelensky, who had joined our discussion virtually and illustrated the situation as he sees it on the ground. After these many important questions for security in the world, we have also looked at the usual, our own matters here. When it comes to the financial planning and its further development, a review is coming up, and it needs to be prepared in detail. It needs to be well prepared, and I want to be very clear that, of course, we need to make additional funds available for the support of Ukraine. But it is also important that the additional tasks coming up need to be taken care of through prioritization prioritization and reallocation within the budget, and I think that not much work has been put into that yet, so this task needs to be pursued with more intensity so that we will be able to succeed doing this in good time. But it could well be that this takes some time. And it is true that for many member states, Germany included, it is not understandable that we should always increase budgets. It is essential that we look at the available funding and how it can be reallocated or used differently so that funding for additional new tasks is available. And of course, we also spoke about migration. That's not a surprise. It's a big, important issue that is affecting all of us, and I think there is wide agreement on reducing irregular migration and irregular entries into the EU. There are many tools for achieving this goal. Tasks that should be assumed by member states, but on the European level it is mainly about the reform of the common European asylum system that needs to succeed. The Council and the Council of Ministers of the Interior have taken a clear position here, and now it is important to find agreement with the European Parliament. Our ambitious goal should be that we succeed in this legislative period of the European Parliament to achieve and finalize such legislation. What will be important is that we also conclude agreements with countries of origin and transit, migration agreements, as Germany is already actively pursuing. One is enabling legal pathways for migration, skilled workers that we need here, and on the other hand, we need to be able to repatriate people who have no right to stay here, make it possible that they are readmitted by the countries of origin or transit. And this is where we all, as cooperating countries, have something to win. So it will be a central issue for the EU and the Commission. We also want to advance the European Union, its economy and its competitiveness. Many issues are important here, and one that is central to me is reducing bureaucracy. The Commission has made proposals. We expect more in terms of speeding up planning and approval procedures, and during our French-German cabinet meeting, the German and French governments have decided that we will send over to Brussels our own proposals and will be very stringent on pursuing this topic further. So this was a council with a strong foreign policy dimension, and rightly so, because the world is requiring us to deal with these issues. So let's move to the questions. The first question, Michael Fischer from DPA, as a surprise. Second row. Thank you. Mr. Chancellor, I have two questions regarding the Middle East. One is that I'd like to know whether the French president explained his proposal to use the anti-ISIS coalition also for fighting Hamas, and what you think of this proposal. Do you think this is not the right way forward, or do you think it's plausible? And on the other hand, I would like to know from you how you see prospects for a peace conference. It was also mentioned in the conclusions. The Spanish Prime Minister said he could envisage such a conference in the coming 6 months. Do you think that is realistic? Well, first of all, we have found agreement on our position. You know the conclusions that have been published, and they are very valuable. And we can derive our common priorities from that. Firstly, that we do everything we can, in addition to supporting Israel's right to self-defense after these terrorist attacks, that we do everything we can to prevent further escalation. And many issues play a role here. They have been discussed. and then the release of the hostages, that is, and the absolutely necessary humanitarian aid, food, water, medicines need to reach Gaza in sufficient amounts. We need more aid convoys than we currently have, and these were the central questions that have been discussed, the concrete proposals we have discussed, and rightly so, I think. These things are important right now. And the peace conference, I believe, is a good symbol, because now it is important to use diplomacy and its possibilities. It's not easy to prepare something like that. There needs to be a lot of work needs to be done in advance. So I think it is good to have this idea, and it can only work if others join in that play an important role for it to succeed. And I think that is the important symbol that comes very timely. And I said that we focused on what is in our resolution, and that is what needs to be done. Florian Neuer. Florian Neuer, ZDF. Mr. Chancellor, a question on the Middle East. Your Irish colleagues explained in detail this morning how the situation has changed over the past 2 weeks. In the beginning, there was unanimous support for Israel without any restrictions. Now there has been a shift more towards criticism of Israel. In which way has the atmosphere changed? And there is the question of the ceasefire in the conclusions. What can you tell us about this? And everybody said that they agreed on long-term financial support for Ukraine, but there is one colleague who rejects, Viktor Orban, who rejects the increase of funds here. What is your stance? I see that there is unchanged, continued support for the efforts of governments and Europe along the lines that we've taken, and part of that is the support for Israel, saying that the country has the right to self-defense. Of course, it is always important to stick to the rules that need to be respected, and as I said, I'm very certain that Israel will do so. So I don't believe that the atmosphere, if we can use that word in that context, the attitude of the citizens, if you will change on what we do as a government. It is, of course, clear, and that's also something that needs to be important to us, to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. This is something that requires support from everybody. All are called upon to make this possible, and we need sufficient volumes of humanitarian support. And of course, there also needs to be a perspective. And in the conclusions of the European Union, this is reflected, and is something that we have always made the case for, a two-state solution and a perspective for an own Palestinian state that will coexist with Israel, and both countries and their citizens can live peacefully and can enjoy a peaceful future. This is, of course, also reflected in our conclusions. So I think it was worth the effort to discuss everything in detail, and we were able to reach agreement on what is written down here. The second thing is Ukraine. I do have the impression that we will decide this, what is necessary for financial stability of Ukraine. And I don't think that the maybe different assessments will influence that. Mr. Chancellor, I have an additional question on that. The French president in his press conference just spoke about the indiscriminate aerial attacks of Israel on Gaza and criticized them harshly. He called for a ceasefire, literally. Do you think it is helpful in the wake of this summit. Is that a symbol of solidarity with Israel, as you have said? And at the same time, he announced that he will try to get out French nationals from Gaza as soon as possible, which is an indicator of a possible ground offensive coming closer. What is the German stance? Well, I would not like to comment on press conferences I haven't attended. I don't think it's appropriate. We were 27 to reach these agreements. This is our position, and of course, it is important to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, and we want to make sure that the hostages are released and can leave, and we want to make sure that those in Gaza who have a foreign nationality can also leave, and also members of international organizations, and this needs to be possible. So this is what we want to be able to do with the conclusions that we've taken. Thomas Gutke, FAZ. Mr. Chancellor, 2 questions. One question regarding migration. The President of the Commission wrote a letter ahead of the Council and spoke about a comprehensive agreement with Egypt that needed to be a priority. Is that your position too? And what should such an agreement look like in order to better function than the one that we have with Tunisia? And another question, does Germany support Mr. Borrell's plan by 2027 to make an available additional 20 million euros within the European Peace Facility? Regarding the first question, we will need agreements with the countries of transit and origin to be able to make sure together that irregular migration decreases. And I support that. So let there be no doubt. But this is also the position of everybody else who was present, that we will do this. Of course, we need to be very precise. In the migration partnerships Germany aspires to conclude, have on the one hand a customized solution regarding the question of what the migration of skilled labor, scientists, workers, and everyone who is urgently needed in Germany want to work there and should work there, what pertains to them, and that differs from country to country. And on the other hand, as I said, regulations for an unbureaucratic readmission of these people that we need to return. And that should also apply to the European Union, and this might also include questions of how you can empower such countries to not have irregular migration emanating from them and really implementing that. The second point is many countries are providing substantial bilateral aid. Germany also, and we will continue to do that. We should focus on that. And we should focus on that. Markus Preis, ARD. Markus Preis, ARD. Mr. Chancellor, you spoke about the Ukrainian president joining online, and what I've seen is that he said the enemies of freedom are trying to open a second front for the West. There is a Hamas delegation at the Moscow Foreign Ministry. Do you think they are actively working on an escalation? And if there was an escalation or a prolongation of the conflict, will there be a competition for certain types of ammunition or weapon systems? We have, and I personally have, reassured the Ukrainian president, I myself in a phone call, of the fact that our support to Ukraine will not waver and that it won't be hampered by the fact that this new bitter conflict caused by this brutal Hamas attack on Israel and its citizens. You see where it leads when you start a war of aggression, as Putin has done. Suddenly, you get partners you might not even have looked at earlier, but this does not speak in favor of the Russian president. The colleague behind, Poen-Mütter. The Gaza war also had its impact on European soil, and the negative events in Arras in France and Brussels too have shown that in Germany there have been protests exceeding certain limits. And how do you assess the risk on the national level and what needs to be done eventually? Well, one thing is sure, is certain. Burning Israeli flags in Germany is a crime. Anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic slogans are punishable under law. It is a crime to rejoice in the killing of people, and if this might happen, authorities will not issue approvals for such protests, and the police will provide security on the ground. The courts will deal with the legal aspects. So we have very clear rules that need to be implemented very clearly. That's our task. And for the rest, it is our task as citizens to be very clear here and find a clear stance, clear words against anti-Semitism, for example. And I see that many people do that beyond any religious borders. Many Muslim citizens in our country have clearly spoken out against anti-Semitism. And I'm very grateful for them doing so. Anna Delf. Mr. Chancellor, can I ask a question about a topic that was maybe not discussed here today or yesterday, but is discussed in Germany in a heated debate? Siemens Energy asked for state support. My question would be, do you think it is admissible that, would you think that the group behind Siemens Energy, Siemens, should jump in, or is there a dilemma because Germany has an interest in protecting German wind energy against Chinese competitors? What is your position on this complex issue? Siemens Energy is an important company, that is absolutely certain. And for the rest, I can tell you that we are in good and trust-based exchanges, but that means that it is confidential and I cannot report on it here. Christian Feld, ARD. Thank you. Mr. Chancellor, you spoke about a warning issued to, among others, the proxies. If you issue a warning, that means it will have consequences if the warning is ignored. Is there also consequences that you are discussing right now? It is important that we do everything we can and that we are very clear in what we say regarding the fact that we do not want an escalation of this conflict. And this is something that is part of all the discussions that I have right now, and I think it is excellent that I not only, of course, spoke to the Prime Minister when I visited Israel, and President Herzog, and Minister Gantz, but that in this time frame I already had many meetings with representatives of the neighboring countries. I spoke to the Turkish president, the Emir of Qatar, the King of Jordan, the Egyptian president, whom I visited as well, and the president of the United Arab Emirates. And I will continue to do that, and I think it is important that everyone needs to use their influence to make sure that there is no further escalation. And these talks certainly are also the basis for the necessary trust that we need in one another. The colleague in the second row. Thank you. Laura Dubois, Financial Times. I also have a question regarding the conflict in the Middle East and migration. Should Egypt accept refugees from Gaza, and if it doesn't, what would be an alternative plan for people fleeing the conflict? I am certain that Egypt will not accept refugees from Gaza, and other countries in the region won't either. Of course, if there are sick people who need to be transferred to our hospitals, some countries in the region might offer such hospital treatment. But this is not what your question was about. You were talking about people who are leaving and going somewhere, and I think that the heads of government, the president of Egypt, the king of Jordan, have made it very clear that they don't think this is a solution to the challenge. What is now important is that we get humanitarian aid in to Gaza, that we make sure that hospitals are running there, and that we do everything that's necessary. And that we do everything to prevent civilian casualties, because this is something that we see with great mourning as well. So it is part of where we understand that this needs to play a role in planning actions and activities. And it does, as far as I know, that we avoid such civilian casualties. Andrew Green, Reuters. Mr. Chancellor, a question regarding your discussions with Mr. Vučić and Mr. Kurti. How do you assess the situation now? After the failure of the talks yesterday, and in the conclusions we can read that the European Council regrets the lack of the implementation by both parties of the agreement. But there are measures taken only against one side. How can you defend that position? In this truly sad situation, we were able to move forward, so I don't share your assessment. But I think if we do a political assessment here, I think one can share my assessment. Both Mr. Kurti and Mr. Vučić said they that the concept and the concrete proposal, the basic agreement, the Ohrid agreement, and an association of the Serbian communities in Kosovo, that they will implement this. This has been clearly stated. So that is an important step, and we will now see to it that it is happening. And measures against Kosovo but not Serbia. Well, it is important that these steps are taken now, and that everyone who has political responsibility on the ground summons the power to prepare the future and settle things for the future. This is not something where in the end one would say who has more scores. It's about how can we build a future for the people in Kosovo and the people in Serbia. How can we get a peaceful perspective for them? Both want to join the EU. We want both to join, and they need to become best neighbors for that. And this happens easiest if those who stand in the front line as heads of state or government, that they make it their own case, their own priority. Next question.
Italian newspaper La Stampa. This morning you had a discussion on the economic situation in Europe and the Eurozone, and ECB President Lagarde stressed the importance of reaching an agreement on the reform of fiscal rules by the end of the year. But your former colleagues in the ECOFIN seems to be still far away from an agreement. So my first question is, how worried are you that the EU will not reach an agreement by the end of the year? At the same time, on banking union, the Eurogroup president, Danelu, stressed the importance of completing the ratification of ESM. Italy has not yet ratified it, but it seems that the Italian parliament is not willing to do that. Are you confident that the Italian parliament will make this step in the coming weeks?
Zunächst mal kann ich nur allen empfehlen.
Well, firstly, I can only give the advice that the ESM rules are implemented. They are good and important for every country that might find itself in a difficult economic situation because it pools our strengths. It is a good reform, so I would like to ask everyone to implement it. The second thing is, both in terms of the review of our multi-annual financial framework and in terms of the Stability and Growth Pact of the European fiscal governance, we need to produce results, and that requires a lot of work. But this is something that one needs to assume as a task to fulfill. The discussions are not yet finalized and the positions are not yet congruent on either side. Oskar Hase, Deutsche Presseagentur, Brussels. Federal Chancellor, the federal government is strongly making the case for the EU foreign policy to work with qualified majority voting. Are you in favor of, for example, also having qualified majority voting in future decisions on Israel? We wish that in foreign policy there will be majority voting possible. Europe needs to speak with one voice is an important development, further development, and in the wake of reforming Europe, we suggest that this be the case in foreign policy, but also when it comes to tax policies. I think that this opinion will be shared by more and more. We are not yet there, but when it comes to enlarging the EU, we need to make sure that the EU is able to act. There will be more members, big and small ones, and if we want to be able to find a common position, there needs to be something like a qualified majority to take decisions in fields where it is possible without changing the contracts. Sorry, off mic. I don't know what your question is pertaining to. You might fear that there might be wrong decisions taken, but I don't share that assessment. One last question. The lady in green, Ala Shali oder non? Mr. Chancellor, I have a question to you. There are militias in Iraq that, as a reaction, have threatened, as a reaction to the Gaza war, they have threatened to attack coalition troops. What is being done? And you said repeatedly you don't want an escalation. What is being done to prevent an escalation, and which role does Iran play? Is there dialogue with Iran in this conflict? It should be very clear that no one should interfere in this conflict and that there is no escalation. This is the very clear message, not only from here, but from many other places. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I would like to ask for your understanding for those who were not able to ask their question, but we will be back mid-December and maybe we have more time then for our press conference. Have a good weekend and see you soon.